Hello again. Today's lecture is lecture 8.2, and the topic is mortal sin. So the outline for today, first we have to define what is mortal sin. Then we're going to ask what are the requirements for mortal sin. And lastly, what happens? What are the effects of mortal sin? What does mortal sin do to us? So first, what is mortal sin? Mortal sin is a grave offense against the law of God. A grave offense against the law of God. So by grave offense, we need to clarify what those two words mean. Grave means serious matter. And by serious matter, we mean it's a violation of the Ten Commandments. So the Ten Commandments give us the blueprint for understanding what grave or serious matter is. And by offense, we mean a willful thought, word, action, or omission. So offense has a few different possibilities. A willful thought, meaning something that we think about in our heads. A word, meaning something that we say. Sometimes we say things that are sinful. By action, we mean something that we do. And then by omission, we mean something that we do not do, but that we are supposed to do. All right, so the offense can be something that we think, something we say, something we do, or something that we do not do, that we're supposed to do. And then lastly, why exactly is mortal sin called mortal? The word mortal means deadly, so that's a big clue right there. The reason why these are deadly sins is because if they go unrepented, meaning we do not ask for forgiveness, they will lead to hell by depriving us of sanctifying grace. Sanctifying grace, to remind you, is what we call the supernatural life of the soul. If we have sanctifying grace, then we have God dwelling in us. That's why it's called supernatural life. So if we lose sanctifying grace, then we lose God dwelling within us. We lose that connection to God in our soul. So, what are the requirements for mortal sin? First, it must be grave matter. By grave matter, we mean something that is serious, something that violates the Ten Commandments. If you recall the parable of the rich young man asked Jesus, "What good must I do to have eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Keep the commandments." By the commandments, he meant the Ten Commandments. So Jesus acknowledged that keeping the Ten Commandments is the baseline for eternal life. Okay, if we disobey the Ten Commandments, then it violates the bond of charity. It separates us from God. Okay, so the Ten Commandments give us that blueprint for understanding what grave matter is. Next, a person must have full knowledge of the seriousness of the act. So, what that means is a person has to know that what they're doing is wrong. Full knowledge. And the third requirement, a person must give full consent to the act. So this is another way of saying that you are acting with your own free will. This is a voluntary act on your part. So the three requirements: grave matter, full knowledge, and full consent. All of these have to be in place in order for it to be a mortal sin. What are the effects of mortal sin? We can break it down into short-term and long-term effects. So the short-term effects, we lose that sanctifying grace. So we lose that connection to God, which makes us separated from God. So it creates separation from God. Now, as soon as we become separated from God, we start to lose that light of goodness in our soul. If we lose that light of goodness, it leads to a greater tendency to sin. So our soul becomes darkened by that separation from God. As our soul darkens, it leads to a greater likelihood, a greater tendency to sin. So then it can create this kind of snowball effect on our soul. Now, if we are separated from God, then we are not allowed to receive the Eucharist. We cannot receive communion at Mass. Unfortunately, a lot of people still receive communion even if they're in a state of mortal sin. They're not supposed to, and in fact, if you do receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin, you are actually committing another mortal sin. It's the sin of what we call sacrilege, or a violation of the rituals of the Church. All right. Long-term effects. Basically, hell. So if we are to die in a state of mortal sin, meaning we have mortal sin on our soul, when we die, we will go to hell, which is why it's so important to ask for forgiveness as soon as we commit a mortal sin. So hell, as we've talked about, is eternal separation from God. What's the solution? The good news is that God does forgive mortal sin. So to do this, we must receive the sacrament of penance. That's when we ask God for his forgiveness for what we've done, and through his infinite mercy, he does grant that forgiveness. So by receiving the sacrament of penance, it restores sanctifying grace, which puts us back into a right relationship with God, which we can then receive the Eucharist again. So mortal sin is important to understand. It's because the potential consequences of living and dying with mortal sin are catastrophic, okay? We're talking about the life of our soul here. We're talking about our eternal destiny, okay? So understanding what mortal sin is, what happens when we commit it, we're not just talking about this life, but we're also talking about our eternal life. So that's it for lecture 8.2. Thanks for watching.